On the brisk morning of December 17, 1944, SS Colonel Joachim Peiper observed a scene unfold in the damp square of Boulingen, a small Belgian town. 50 American prisoners of war were compelled to fill the fuel tanks of his Panther and Tiger tanks with gasoline. Peiper, then 29 years old, commanded the lead armored spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, known as the Leibstandarte, Adolf Hitler's personal bodyguard regiment. This offensive had commenced less than 24 hours prior, with his tanks possessing only half the necessary fuel for their mission. The town square, once a bustling cattle market, now reeked of high-octane American gasoline, punctuated by the grim silence of terrified young men in olive drab, forced to refuel the very machines that had just claimed the lives of their comrades. 8 months later, in a prisoner of war camp in Freising, Bavaria, Major Kenneth Heckler, an American interrogator and historian in uniform, faced Joachim Peiper across a table. Heckler sought Peiper's full account of those 9 days in the Ardennes. Towards the culmination of a lengthy interview, Heckler leaned forward and posed a question that profoundly reshaped historical understanding of the Battle of the Bulge. He inquired if Peiper had realized, on the night of December 18, 1944, that his foremost Panther tank had halted within 300 yards of an American fuel depot containing approximately 3 million gallons of gasoline. Heckler's official report later detailed Peiper's reaction, a shrug, followed by a slight, arrogant smile. Then, the SS colonel, whose battle group had perpetrated the Malmedy massacre 8 months prior, uttered 2 words in English: "I am sorry." This precise moment in that phrasing room is central to our narrative. The fundamental question is not why the Germans ultimately lost the Battle of the Bulge. Every candid German general, from Gerd von Rundstedt to the lowliest corporal, recognized the offensive's inherent futility from its inception. Rather, the enigma lies in why captured German soldiers, after their surrender, repeatedly expressed astonishment upon encountering American supply depots. Why did men who had endured campaigns from the outskirts of Moscow to the oil fields of the Caucasus stare in disbelief at American fuel dumps? The answer resides in 2 crucial figures. The Ardennes offensive commenced with an estimated 4 million gallons of motor fuel allocated for the entire operation. In stark contrast, a single American First Army fuel dump, nestled in the woods between Spa and Stavelot, held between 2 and 3 million gallons of gasoline, one depot, in one patch of forest, in one quiet corner of Belgium. This story chronicles how the immense disparity between these 2 numbers extinguished Hitler's final hope, and how a young SS colonel named Joachim Peiper advanced, drove, and eventually struggled past colossal quantities of American gasoline, utterly unaware of their existence. By autumn 1943, the German war machine was, quite literally, running on fumes. The relentless Allied bombing campaign against Germany's synthetic fuel production had crippled the Reich's energy infrastructure. In April 1944, German synthetic fuel plants had yielded 316,000 metric tons of fuel in a single month. By September 1944, this output had plummeted to a mere 17,000 tons, a catastrophic 95% obliteration of a nation's strategic energy foundation within 5 months. Albert Speer, the individual overseeing German armaments and war production, dispatched a memorandum to Adolf Hitler on June 30, 1944. Speer reported that the enemy had achieved a 90% reduction in German aviation gasoline by June 22. Following the major oil raids of May 12, Speer recalled Hitler's almost suicidal pronouncement: the enemy had struck Germany at a profound weakness, and if the Americans persisted, Germany would soon possess no fuel production worth mentioning. Hitler then added his sole hope, that the Allied Air Force General Staff was as disorganized as his own. The Allies, of course, were not. By December 1944, the Wehrmacht's year-end aviation gasoline reserve stood at 146,000 tons, a drastic reduction from 440,000 tons just 12 months prior. A staggering 67% of the Reich's air fuel reserves had simply vanished. Despite this energy crisis, Adolf Hitler elected to launch the most substantial German offensive in the West since the fall of France in 1940. This plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, aimed for Antwerp, the critical Belgian port facilitating the flow of Allied supplies that were suffocating Germany. 3 German armies, including 2 Panzer armies, were tasked with breaching the sparsely defended Ardennes forest, crossing the Meuse River, and driving 125 miles northwest to seize Antwerp, thereby splitting the Allied armies. The Supreme Command had pledged approximately 4 million gallons of motor fuel from the Führer Reserve, a sacred strategic stockpile, for the assault forces. Generaloberst Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations, confirmed this allocation in his post-war interrogation. However, the reality on the ground diverged sharply. General Horst Stumpf, OB West Chief Armored Officer, informed American interrogators in 1945 that the majority of the fuel reserves were situated along the Rhine River. Once snow fell, these reserves became inaccessible due to impassable road conditions, and trains could not operate. Allied fighter bombers dominated the daytime skies. The fuel Hitler had promised remained stranded in rail yards 200 miles east of its intended destination. In December 1944, 2 days before the offensive, Joachim Peiper, commander of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, attended a division conference in Tomdorf, a small town in the Eifel Hills. There, he heard regimental commander Wilhelm Monk deliver news that would dictate subsequent events. Peiper recounted Monk's words during his interrogation 8 months later: 2 trainloads of gasoline, critically needed for the offensive, had failed to arrive. Consequently, orders were issued for all units to procure fuel from captured enemy stocks. This implied that a Waffen-SS regimental command was being explicitly informed, in advance, that its offensive would rely on refueling from American supply depots not yet secured. The following day, December 15, Peiper attended a corps-level conference where Lehmann, the now-deceased Chief of Staff of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, confirmed that the anticipated gasoline had still not materialized. Yet, the Führer insisted the offensive would commence on the 16th regardless. When Heckler questioned Peiper in that phrasing room in September 1945 about the missing gasoline, Peiper's response encapsulated the unraveling logic of the German war effort. He surmised it was delayed, rerouted, and might have arrived later in another area, but they never saw it. It is crucial to precisely understand Peiper's starting position. In his subsequent interrogation, documented as Ithint 11, Peiper stated that at the time of the initial assault, his tanks possessed only enough fuel for approximately 50 miles of operation, which he described as about half the basic load without any reserve. The objective, the Meuse River, was over 90 miles away at its nearest point, and Antwerp a distant 125 miles. The fuel consumption of a King Tiger heavy tank, a 68-ton behemoth, was roughly 2 American gallons per mile on a good paved road, and significantly more on the hilly, muddy lanes of the Ardennes. The arithmetic was not merely challenging, it was impossible. During that extensive September interview in Phrasing, Heckler posed one more unforgettable question: did Peiper know, before the attack, where to expect to find captured gasoline? Peiper answered unhesitatingly. He stated that his division's intelligence officer possessed a situation map indicating American supply installations. Based on this map, Peiper said, they believed they could seize gasoline at Bühlingen and Stavelot. This statement is among the most significant in post-war German military records. It reveals that German intelligence in December 1944 had pinpointed the locations of specific American fuel dumps. It further demonstrates that German planning was not merely hoping for a fortunate capture of American fuel, it was fundamentally dependent upon it. The map was the plan. There was, however, one critical flaw: the map was incomplete. The Germans had identified medium-sized supply dumps along the obvious approach routes. What they had failed to locate, because they could not, were the truly massive 1st Army Class III fuel installations concealed within the dense pine forests between the resort town of Spa and the bridge town of Stavelot. These depots collectively held between 2 and 3 million American gallons of gasoline, representing the largest forward fuel reserves in the entire Allied logistics network in Northwest Europe. The 6th Panzer Army had been allocated, on paper, fewer than 4.5 million gallons for the entire offensive. A single American depot in a tranquil Belgian forest held nearly as much fuel as Sepp Dietrich's entire army. The Germans remained entirely oblivious. The offensive commenced in the frigid pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944. By nightfall, despite fierce American resistance on Elsenborn Ridge to the north, Peiper's Kampfgruppe was already grinding westward through the broken roads of the Eifel. He was consuming fuel at a rate exceeding expectations. Peiper would later inform Heckler that by the time he reached the town of Losheim, his column had expended as much gasoline in 25 kilometers as he would typically anticipate using in 50, owing to the mountainous terrain. Around 4 in the morning on the 17th, his leading elements rolled into the village of Hansfeld. The defenders were rear-echelon American troops, half asleep, poorly equipped, and scattered. The town fell within minutes. Almost immediately upon the Americans raising their hands in surrender, the killings began. Historian Rick Atkinson, in The Guns at Last Light, recounts the events. 8 American soldiers, roused into the street in their underwear and bare feet, shouting, "Kamerad," were lined up against a wall and executed by machine gun fire. They were the first of 19 unarmed American prisoners murdered that morning, but not the last. By dawn, Peiper faced a decision. His assigned route led westward towards the village of Schönberg, along a poor dirt road mired in winter mud. However, a superior paved road ran north through Bühlingen. As Peiper would later confess to Heckler, one factor swayed his choice. He had been informed of an American gasoline dump at Bühlingen, and his unit, he stated, was already running low on fuel. Peiper diverted north. Around 7 in the morning, his Panthers and half-tracks rumbled into Bühlingen. The defenders were caught by surprise. The town housed elements of Major General Walter Lauer's 99th Infantry Division headquarters, the quartermaster company of the 2nd Infantry Division, and scattered artillery liaison troops. On a hastily cleared field at the town's edge sat about a dozen L-4 Cub light aircraft, the unarmed spotter planes used by American artillery officers to direct fire. German machine gunners swept along the airstrip, strafing each plane in turn, before reaching the fuel dump. The precise amount Peiper captured at Bühlingen, as he himself stated under interrogation, was 200,000 liters, or approximately 50,000 gallons in American measure. What Peiper did next, he described to Heckler in 2 concise sentences. Of course, they found it. They captured 200,000 liters in Bühlingen and used 50 American prisoners to fill all of their tanks. Peiper considered this a stroke of luck. Atkinson's research unearthed records of that scene. Several American soldiers, hidden in a cellar on the outskirts of town, strangled their pet dog to prevent its barking. 200 other men were rounded up. Before being marched east to prison cages, these GIs were forced to refuel the Panzers with 5-gallon jerrycans in the open square at the town center, the same square that had once served as the local cattle market. For 2.5 hours, the Panzers were replenished. Somewhere between 7 and 10 in the morning, Joachim Peiper stood in that square, observing American boys hand-pour American fuel into the tanks that would carry him deeper into Belgium. The column then advanced. Before the Germans departed Bühlingen, they murdered 50 more unarmed American prisoners of war. Post-war Senate investigations into the Malmedy massacre, officially catalogued at the National Archives, provide exact figures: 19 at Hansfeld, 50 at Bühlingen. The killings would persist throughout the day. Approximately 2.5 hours after leaving Bühlingen, Peiper's lead column came to a halt at a country crossroads known as Ardennes, just south of Malmedy. A small American convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion had driven directly into them. The Americans were swiftly disarmed and herded into a snowy field beside the road. Approximately 86 unarmed American prisoners of war were shot down where they stood. These killings at Ardennes Crossroads would become globally known as the Malmedy Massacre, the single worst atrocity committed against American prisoners of war in the European theater. Peiper, his tanks now fully fueled with American gasoline, pressed onward. By dusk on December 17, Peiper's lead vehicle had penetrated a deep valley along the Amblev River. He was tantalizingly close, by his own later admission, to the open road to the Meuse, having covered nearly 30 miles in a single day, an extraordinary advance for an armored column in winter terrain. The combined American defense north of him was being decimated, and here. Barely 3 miles to the east of Stavelot, Joachim Peiper made a solitary choice that would ultimately seal the fate of his entire offensive. He decided to halt for the night. It was dusk, his tanks were exhausted, and his men had been awake for nearly 2 full days. The primary bridge over the Amblev at Stavelot lay directly ahead, visible in the diminishing light, and at that precise moment, it was virtually undefended. Peiper would later confess, with the bitter clarity of hindsight, that had he pressed on through the darkness, he could have secured the bridge without significant opposition and rolled directly into the heart of the American supply zone. But he did not advance, he stopped. This decision proved to be the single greatest stroke of luck for the Americans in the whole Ardennes campaign. 18 miles north of Peiper's stopping point, amidst the dense forests surrounding Francorchamps and along the road south from Spa, lay between 2 and 3 million gallons of American gasoline. The official Army history, penned by historian Hugh Cole and published by the Center of Military History in 1965, offers precise details about these reserves. Cole stated that the most crucial item in that vicinity was a vast store of fuel, exceeding 2 million gallons, held in dumps just north of the two towns. British historian Peter Caddick-Adams, in his Ardennes narrative, Snow and Steel, elaborates further. Caddick-Adams specifies that United States Fuel Depot No. 3, situated on the route from Francorchamps to Stavelot, contained up to 3 million gallons of gasoline. This fuel was not in large tanks but stacked in hundreds of thousands of 5-gallon American jerrycans, arranged in long rows concealed beneath the pine trees along a 5-mile stretch of forest road. Each jerrycan was protected from the elements by the trees and from enemy detection by a small contingent of 60 men from the 5th Belgian Fusilier Battalion, attached to the American 12th Army Group, supplemented by a single platoon from the 3,814th Quartermaster Gasoline Supply Company of the 1st United States Army. 60 Belgian Fusiliers and 1 platoon of black American truck drivers and fuel handlers guarded millions of gallons of high-octane fuel, while less than 20 miles to the south, the leading spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division slept in their tanks in the darkness. If Peiper had crossed the Stavelot Bridge on the night of December 17, the road north would have been his. He could have sped up the highway to Francorchamps before dawn, driving his Tigers and Panthers amidst the endless rows of stacked American jerrycans. He could have refueled an entire Panzer Corps from a single American forest. He could have driven straight to Antwerp. He had no idea it was there. The morning of December 18, 1944, began with one of those minor, almost imperceptible American actions that determine the fate of armies. Major Paul Solis, an officer with the 526th Armored Infantry Battalion, had been dispatched south the previous night to fill any gap he could find. By mid-morning on the 18th, with Peiper's tanks now rumbling through Stavelot, Solis somehow ascertained that the road north led to Depot No. 3 and millions of gallons of American gasoline. He had perhaps an hour before German reconnaissance might reach that road. What Solis accomplished has become one of the iconic small unit feats of the Western Front. Hugh Cole, in the official Army history, describes it with deliberate brevity. Solis commandeered some gasoline from the Francorchamps dump. He ordered his men to pour it into a deep road cut, where there was no alternative route, and then set it ablaze. The outcome, Cole writes, was a perfect anti-tank barrier. 5-gallon American jerrycans, one after another, were broken open and emptied into a road defile, creating a flame so tall and intense that no armored vehicle on Earth could possibly pass through it. Cole specifies the exact quantity Solis incinerated, 24,000 gallons. Yet, the most crucial part of this narrative is not the fire itself. The most crucial part is what was simultaneously unfolding half a mile to the south. While Solis ignited his barrier, every operational truck within a 30-mile radius was racing to evacuate the remaining depot. Private First Class Theo Lauter of the 3,814th Quartermaster Gasoline Supply Company later provided testimony, preserved in the Belgian Veterans Archives, describing that evacuation. Lauter stated that the fuel evacuation was underway, with trucks from nearly every unit in the 1st Army participating, and that most of the fuel was safely removed. Captain Joseph Wilson, of the 5th Corps Quartermaster Section, commandeered every available truck under written authorization and successfully evacuated approximately 2 million gallons of petroleum products to a railhead further to the rear. Sergeant James Duncan of the 147th Signal Company, attached to the 7th Armored Division, gave a combat interview on December 31, 1944. He recounted how Lieutenant Coombe had discovered an abandoned ration dump and a gasoline dump of about 1 million gallons, and how, in his exact words, a colored trucking outfit with large trucks was loading and transporting the cans of gas. This colored trucking outfit was almost certainly a quartermaster truck company of the kind that had been driving the Red Ball Express, the great American supply lifeline of the preceding autumn. By the time the 83rd day of the Red Ball Express concluded on November 16, those predominantly African American truck drivers had transported 400,120 to 193 tons of supplies forward from the Normandy beaches. On December 18, they repeated this feat, on a smaller scale, in a single afternoon, with German tanks audible in the next valley. It is one of the unsung facts of the Ardennes campaign. The men who preserved the enormous fuel reserve at Francorchamps on the day the Battle of the Bulge hung by a thread were largely black American truck drivers, toiling under fire in the cold of a Belgian forest, even as their own nation's flag at home denied them full citizenship. While Solis ignited his barrier and the truck sped away, the remainder of December 18 was determining Peiper's fate in an entirely different manner. Peiper, having turned west out of Stavelot instead of north up the Francorchamps road, was now encountering a series of American engineer battalions that simply refused to allow him to cross water. At 11:45 in the morning, near the town of Troipons, Captain Sam Schuber of C Company, 51st Engineer Combat Battalion, detonated the Amblev River Bridge directly in the path of Peiper's leading Panther. The lone 57mm anti-tank gun from the 526th Armored Infantry Battalion fired a single shot, striking the lead Panther. 4 American gunners were killed by the German return fire, but they had bought the engineers their crucial minute. The bridge collapsed, closing Peiper's initial westward route. Peiper then turned north along the Amblev, then west again, searching for another crossing. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, a low cloud cover briefly parted, allowing a flight of American P-47 Thunderbolts and British Typhoons to locate his column in the open near the village of Cheneuse. They obliterated approximately 12 vehicles, including 2 Panthers. Then, at 4:45 in the afternoon, came the most renowned of the engineer engagements. A young first lieutenant, Alvin Edelstein of a company, 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, blew the timber trestle bridge over the Lienne River at Habimont just as Peiper's lead Panthers rounded the bend. According to numerous journalists and German post-war accounts, including those compiled by Peter Caddick Adams, Peiper screamed 3 words at the burning timbers across the gorge, in German, Dieser verdammten Ingenieur, those damned engineers. He turned back towards the river valley, sought refuge for the night in a Belgian aristocrat's chateau called Freudcourt, and that night began to comprehend that the path to the Meuse was closing. Just before midnight, 20 miles to the south, Captain Leland Kofer of a company, 105th Engineer Combat Battalion of the 30th Infantry Division, brought down the stone bridge over the Amblev at Stavelot with 2,050 pounds of TNT. When Associated Press reporter Hal Boyle reached him hours later and inquired whether any German tank could now ford the river there, Kofer provided a statement that ended up in newspapers across the United States. Kofer declared, "No German tank can jump that." On the morning of December 19, Peiper was trapped. He had a panzer division on the western side of a series of demolished bridges, with the Americans now in his rear, his communications severed, his Luftwaffe air supply drops mostly falling into American hands, and his fuel situation critical. He still had no idea that in the pine forests north of Stavelot, which his lead troops had never reached, millions of gallons of American gasoline were being trucked away to the rear, jerrycan by jerrycan, loaded onto the beds of Quartermaster Corps Studebakers and driven east in convoy, while a few hundred yards of high-octane flame in a deep road cut kept any opportunistic German pushed to the north on the wrong side of a wall of fire. To grasp the profound cognitive shock experienced by captured Germans when they finally witnessed the interior of an American supply zone, one must examine the stark quantitative differences between the two sides. By December 1944, a single American armored division in active combat consumed approximately 100,000 gallons of motor fuel daily. During the Grand Pursuit across France in August and September of 1944, General George Patton's 3rd United States Army, on certain days, had consumed 800,000 gallons of fuel within a single 24-hour period. The American supply lifeline that sustained this consumption was a marvel of industrial logistics. From August 25 to November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express truck convoy system operated continuously for 83 days, with a peak of nearly 6,000 trucks on the road, hauling 412,000 tons of supplies forward to the armies. Across the English Channel, British engineers had installed 17 separate undersea pipelines, collectively known as Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, which by the end of the war had pumped over 200 million American gallons of fuel from England to France. The newly opened port of Antwerp boasted 498 storage tanks spread across 208 acres of dockyard, with a combined capacity of 124 million gallons of petroleum products. Now, consider the German situation. In 1944, the Wehrmacht produced 1,105,000 metric tons of aviation gasoline against a consumption of 1,403,000 tons. They produced 1,471,000 tons of motor fuel against a consumption of 1,805,000 tons. In both categories, they were depleting strategic reserves faster than they could replenish them. The synthetic fuel industry, which had supplied roughly half of all Wehrmacht fuel, had been decimated. The Luna plant, the largest single producer in the Reich, had been struck by 22 raids, 6,552 bomber sorties, and 18,328 tons of bombs in a single year, operating, on average, at 9% of its capacity. The 6th SS Panzer Army, which included Joachim Peiper's spearhead, had been allocated approximately 4 million gallons of fuel for the entire Ardennes offensive. A single American forward fuel dump near Stavelot held nearly as much. That is the fundamental statistic. That is why this episode, this 9-day struggle in a corner of Belgium, became the moment when the entire German officer corps finally grasped, deep in their bones, that they had lost the war. Not at Stalingrad. Not at Kursk. Not on D-Day. But here. In the snow. Watching American boys pour American gasoline that the Americans possessed in such abundance that they could afford to set 124,000 gallons of it ablaze just to make a road appear impassable to a German tank crew that was never going to drive up that road anyway. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, the comprehensive post-war Allied investigation into the effects of the air campaign, reached a verdict on this matter that has never been seriously challenged. The survey, in its summary report dated September 30, 1945, stated that when the Germans launched their counteroffensive on December 16, their fuel reserves were insufficient to sustain the operation. They relied on capturing Allied stocks. Failing in this, many Panzer units were lost when they ran out of gasoline. By December 21, Joachim Peiper was no longer attacking. He was slowly being squeezed. His remaining strength had been consistently concentrated in 3 small Belgian villages along the Amblève. The largest was L'Église, a hilltop hamlet of stone houses and 1 small church. American attacks from the north and west, conducted by elements of the 30th Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 3rd Armored Division, were constricting him. The highest-ranking American prisoner in Peiper's hands at this point was Major Hal McCown of the 2nd Battalion, 119th Infantry, 30th Division. McCown was held in Peiper's command post in L'Église. He spent several days observing the SS colonel at close quarters and survived to write a detailed after-action report, which historian Michael Reynolds later reproduced in his biography, The Devil's Adjutant. McCown wrote that Peiper, on the night of December 20 to 21, was completely confident in Germany's ability to defeat the Allies. Peiper spoke at length about Heinrich Himmler's new reserve army, claiming it contained so many new divisions, both armored and otherwise, that American intelligence officers would wonder where they all came from. It was a delusion. By December 21, the 6th SS Panzer Army was already breaking on the unyielding steel rim of Elsenborn Ridge. The 12th SS Panzer Division had been decimated by the entrenched defenders of the 99th Infantry Division and the artillery of the 2nd Infantry Division. The 5th Panzer Army to the south was gaining more ground, but it too was running out of fuel and time. Across the entire front, the Great Offensive had bulged 50 miles into the Allied lines but had failed to capture a single one of its operational objectives. On December 23, two events occurred that ended any possibility of German victory. First, the weather cleared. The fog that had grounded Allied tactical aviation for a week burned off. By mid-morning, the sky over Belgium filled with the distinctive engine roar of thousands of P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, B-26 Marauders, and British Typhoons. German columns on every road were being annihilated from the air. The German chief armored officer, Horst Stumpf, would later inform his American interrogators that the Allied air attacks had laid bomb carpets on the roads and railways, and throttled an already inadequate supply system. Second, at 2 in the afternoon, Regimental Commander Wilhelm Monk gave Peiper permission to break out. At 5 in the afternoon, formal orders arrived from Corps headquarters. Peiper was to break out to the east with his vehicles and his men. Peiper read the order and immediately understood, as he later told Heckler, that the only chance was to break out without vehicles and without the wounded. In the early morning hours of December 24, 1944, Christmas Eve, the soldiers of Kampfgruppe Peiper placed demolition charges on every armored vehicle they had left. At 1 in the morning, approximately 800 men assembled on foot in the village square at La Glise. They marched into the woods, leaving behind what became the most photographed German equipment graveyard of the Western War in the small streets of La Glise and the surrounding villages. The definitive count, meticulously compiled by Belgian historian Gerard Grégoire and now housed at the Musée de la France, detailing the devastation of December 1944 in La Glise itself, remains meticulously preserved in the historical archives. 6 mighty King Tigers, those 68-ton behemoths of heavy armor, designed to spearhead the advance to the Meuse, were among the lost. The enemy's shock was palpable as they surveyed the wreckage: 10 armored cars, a formidable whirlwind anti-aircraft tank, along with countless trucks, motorcycles, versatile swim wagon amphibious vehicles, and even captured American jeeps lay scattered. In the surrounding hamlets, more Panthers and Tigers added to the toll. In total, approximately 135 armored vehicles were abandoned by a single battle group during a mere 9-day operation. Major McCown, who accompanied the column as it stealthily withdrew from La Glise, recorded that at 5 in the morning, the first explosion of a tank ripped through the air. Within a mere 30 minutes, the entire sector previously occupied by Peiper's command was transformed into a raging inferno of fiercely burning vehicles. This was the meticulous work of the small detachment Peiper had left behind, tasked with the complete annihilation of all his remaining equipment. What followed for the men who had escaped was a grueling 36-hour forced march through deep snow in sub-zero temperatures, devoid of food, rest, or any prospect of resupply. A Luftwaffe flak sergeant named Karl Lohn, a survivor of this arduous march, penned a vivid account of the ordeal. Lohn recounted that an unbearable thirst, brought on by the dry cold, plagued them most acutely. He described how the men desperately tore ice-covered snow from trees and sucked on it for moisture. Others, he wrote, threw themselves like animals over every puddle, gulping down the muddy water. During brief 5-minute breaks, some collapsed into sleep on their feet, failing to awaken when the march resumed, and were lost forever in the enveloping darkness. On the morning of December 25, Christmas Day, the tattered remnants of Kampfgruppe Peiper finally reached friendly lines near the village of Wann. Historian Michael Reynolds, drawing from German records, estimates that 770 men crossed back over the Somme River, a stark contrast to the original Kampfgruppe strength of nearly 5,000. Peiper himself, consulting with a doctor that morning, counted only the men he had personally led into Belgium, noting that they had departed with 3,000 and now numbered just 717. Regardless of the precise figure, the profound significance was undeniable. A battle group that had crossed the starting line 9 days prior, serving as the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, was now reduced to a column of utterly exhausted infantry, emerging from a Belgian forest through deep snow, without a single operational vehicle to their name. 8 months after the wreckage of his Tigers lay strewn at La Glise, in September of 1945, Joachim Peiper found himself seated at a wooden table in a prisoner of war facility in Bavaria. He patiently answered the inquiries of an American historian in uniform, one of several German officers participating in what the United States Army designated the Foreign Military Studies program. Peiper proved to be a particularly crucial interview subject for two compelling reasons. Firstly, he had commanded the very spearhead of the entire German Ardennes offensive. Secondly, he was concurrently under investigation for war crimes perpetrated at Hansfeld, Boulingen, the Ardennes crossroads, and other locations. The Malmedy massacre trial was looming, and Peiper was fully aware of it. Heckler, in the introductory remarks of his interview report, was unflinching in his assessment of the man across from him. He characterized Peiper as a highly arrogant, quintessential SS man, thoroughly indoctrinated in Nazi ideology. He further noted Peiper's immense pride in his regiment and division, observing his tendency to make disparaging comments about other units. Heckler also speculated that Peiper might have been apprehensive about his future fate. Then, Heckler penned a sentence that illuminates the peculiar nature of the entire transcript. He wrote that as soon as it became clear the conversation would be restricted to military tactics and not war crimes, Peiper became significantly more forthcoming. Peiper spoke good English, Heckler observed, and took evident pleasure in correcting the interpreter. The resulting interview, catalogued by the Army as Ithint 10, spans dozens of pages of single-spaced transcript, now housed within the National Archives in Record Group 549. It represents the closest thing we possess to a comprehensive operational confession from the spearhead commander of Hitler's final offensive, recorded in his own words, with the remains of a panzer division still corroding in the snow behind him. And within that document, page after page, in calm and precise English, Joachim Peiper concedes the very truth his commanders had refused to acknowledge, even to themselves. He admits that the operation had been conceived with the expectation of seizing American fuel. He admits he had been informed, in advance, of the locations of American fuel dumps. He admits that the map he carried into Belgium showed him Boulingen and Stavelot. He admits it did not show him Frankochamps. He admits that when his lead Panther ground to a halt on the night of December 18, he had no inkling of what lay in the forest just 300 yards away. The narrative of the Battle of the Bulge ultimately boils down to two pivotal numbers. 4 million gallons of fuel were allocated to an entire German army for an offensive aimed at the English Channel. 3 million gallons of fuel sat in 5-gallon American jerrycans in a single Belgian forest, guarded by 60 Belgian Fusiliers and a lone platoon of black American gas handlers, a mere 300 yards from the lead tank of an SS colonel who remained utterly oblivious to their presence. He never knew it was there. The Foreign Military Studies project, of which Heckler's interview with Peiper was but a small component, eventually generated thousands of pages of post-war German testimony. When read collectively, these documents form an extraordinary chorus of senior officers, slowly, painstakingly, in the polite bureaucratic German of military reports, admitting that they had lost the war to a logistical machine they simply could not rival. General Horst Stumpf, the OB West chief armored officer, informed his interrogators that the bulk of the fuel reserves had been situated along the Rhine River and, once snow fell, could not be moved forward due to the impassable road conditions. For this reason, Stumpf stated, they could only deploy a small fraction of their available tanks and, moreover, lost many tanks due to a critical lack of fuel. General Asso von Manschufel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, the army operating to Peiper's south, rendered the verdict in the most unvarnished terms. Manschufel told British historian Basil Liddell Hart in post-war interviews that the promised fuel never arrived because the railways were unable to transport it forward in time, owing to relentless Allied air attacks. Manschufel later reflected that the necessity of destroying such a vast number of tanks during the retreat in January of 1945 was primarily due to an insufficient number of recovery vehicles, which in turn stemmed from fuel shortages. Manschufel estimated that the number of tanks lost due to this lack of recovery vehicles was 5 times higher than those lost in combat. 5 times more tanks lost to a lack of fuel than to American fire. Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, Peiper's own army commander, the veteran First World War sergeant whom Hitler had elevated to lead the Reich's premier panzer formation, offered the most poignant post-war summation. He lamented that all he had needed to do was cross the river, capture Brussels, and then proceed to take the port of Antwerp. The snow, he recounted, was waist-deep, and there was simply no room to deploy 4 tanks abreast, let alone 6 armored divisions. Daylight did not appear until 8 in the morning and vanished again by 4 in the afternoon. His tanks, Dietrich declared, could not fight at night. And all this, he added bitterly, at Christmas time. The man whose offensive it truly was, Adolf Hitler, made no post-war statement of any kind. He shot himself in a bunker in Berlin on April 30, 1945. Military historian Peter Caddick-Adams, writing 70 years later, encapsulated the entire campaign in a single sentence that no honest reader of the records can genuinely dispute. He wrote that the German assault was doomed to failure from its very inception. There is one final aspect of this story that does not appear in any single document, precisely because it cannot be reduced to a solitary quote. It is the slow, accumulating astonishment that captured German officers experienced as they traversed American rear areas in the spring of 1945. The German General Staff had been consistently informed throughout the war that American industrial output was merely a propaganda exaggeration. They had been told this so persistently that, even as their armies began to be overrun in early spring of 1945, many still half believed it. And then they were captured. Otto von Manschufel, who had commanded the 5th Panzer Army in the Ardennes, informed British historian Basil Liddell Hart that the mobility of his forces had steadily and rapidly diminished under the relentless weight of Allied air attacks on the supply roads behind the front. Albert Speer would later write in his memoir, Inside the Third Reich, that the catastrophe of Hitler's war machine in the West had been, at its most fundamental level, a catastrophe of oil. The American 8th Air Force and British Bomber Command had decimated the synthetic fuel industry upon which the entire Wehrmacht depended, and there had never been any genuine means to replace it. But the most profound realization dawned when senior German prisoners were finally permitted to witness what they had been fighting against. The Germans had known, in some abstract sense, that American production surpassed German production. Yet, they had not grasped the sheer scale. They had not comprehended what a single American forward supply depot truly looked like in the flesh. They had not understood that the fuel dump Joachim Peiper had stumbled into at Boulingen, 50,000 gallons, a dump that had seemed a stroke of luck for him, was the smallest size of forward fuel installation the American First Army maintained. A dump like Francorchamps, with up to 3 million gallons of gasoline in stacked jerrycans beneath the pines, was, within the American supply system, simply normal. There were others like it stretching all the way back to the English Channel, supplied by pipelines beneath the sea, by truck convoys operating day and night, and by a port at Antwerp capable of holding more petroleum products in its tanks than the entire German Reich produced in 3 months of synthetic fuel work. The Germans were fighting from a synthetic fuel base that had produced merely 17,000 tons in the month their offensive was launched. The Americans were fighting from a continent. This is the moment that captured Germans, in their post-war letters, memoirs, and veteran interviews for the remainder of their lives, continually revisited. Not the moment of surrender, not the moment of formal defeat. But the moment when they finally beheld, with their own eyes, the sheer magnitude of the American supply tail supporting a single American division. What they had been fighting was not an army, it was a continent. That, ultimately, is what cognitive dissonance looks like in the German post-war interrogation files. Joachim Peiper, the commander whose Tigers and Panthers had driven deeper into Belgium than any other unit of Hitler's last offensive, sat across a table from a young American historian in a prisoner-of-war camp in Bavaria. Hearing for the first time that he had passed within 300 yards of 3 million gallons of American gasoline, he simply shrugged his shoulders, offered that small, arrogant smile, and remarked in his polite English, "I am sorry." He was sorry. He should have been. Because the gasoline he never saw was the crucial difference between an offensive that might have reached Antwerp and an offensive that perished in a Belgian forest on Christmas Eve. The Battle of the Bulge was decided in Boulingen at 7 in the morning on December 17, when 50 American prisoners were forced to siphon American fuel into German tanks. It was decided in a road cut south of Francorchamps on December 18, when Major Solis ignited 124,000 gallons of gasoline to render a road impassable. It was decided in the woods between Spa and Stavelot, where black American truck drivers worked under fire to evacuate 2 million more gallons. It was decided at the timber trestle at Habimont, where Lieutenant Edelstein blew a bridge in the final seconds before the lead Panther rounded the bend, and then heard the SS colonel on the other side of the gorge shriek those 3 words, "Those damned engineers." It was decided, above all, in the empty fuel tanks of the German trains that never reached the Rhine and in the silent synthetic fuel plants that the American 8th Air Force had systematically destroyed, month after month, throughout the summer of 1944. The Germans did not lose the Battle of the Bulge to the cold. They did not lose to the snow. They did not lose to the resistance of any single American division, brave as those divisions were. They lost to a logistical machine they had been hearing rumors about for years and refused, until the very last moment, to believe was real. Peiper survived the war. He served 11 years in prison for the Malmedy massacre before his sentence was commuted, lived in France under an assumed name, and was murdered in his own home in July of 1976, in the village of Treves in eastern France, in a fire of disputed origin. His killers were never found. The Americans who burned the gasoline at Francorchamps returned home, married their sweethearts, raised families, and mostly never spoke of what they had done that day. Richard Paul Solis was awarded the Silver Star and lived a long, quiet life. The Belgian Fusiliers who had guarded the dump went back to their villages. The black American truck drivers of First Army returned to a country that, for another 20 years, would not permit them to sit at the front of a public bus. If you drive south from Spa toward Stavelot today, on a quiet summer afternoon, you can stop near the deep cut where Solis set his fire. The road is shaded now by tall pines that have grown since the war. The smell of wood smoke, if present, emanates from someone's chimney. But beneath those trees, 8 decades ago, sat 3 million gallons of high-octane gasoline, and on the road below, in the dusk of December 18, 1944, an SS colonel in a Panther tank turned away from a burning wall of flame and sought another path west, never knowing that the distinction between victory and annihilation had been measured, in the end, not in courage and not in tactics, but in how many 5-gallon jerrycans a country 8,000 miles away could load onto how many trucks and ships, and pipelines and forward depots, and deliver to a forest in Belgium in time. On the morning of December 17, 1944, in a cattle market in a small Belgian town, an SS colonel stood and watched 50 American prisoners pour American gasoline into German tanks. He believed, in that moment, that it was a lucky break. It was not a lucky break. It was the answer to a question the German General Staff had been refusing to answer honestly for 3 years. They had already lost.